Hello, everyone. Thank you for checking out this special episode of Really Dicey. This is Manny, and I am here with.
Andrew Welker. I also write under the pen name QL Games. Q as in Queen, L as in Lycanthrope, Games as in Games.
Today, we're going to talk about Manual of the Planes for 5e D&D, which I'm very excited about. And Manual of the Planes is one of those like really popular books. That there was a version come out for 1e, 3e. I think it skipped 2e because we had the Planescape setting at the time, and I believe there was one for 4th edition as well. And sadly, even though they D&D Wizards of the Coast has finally put out Planescape for 5th edition, there is no Manual of the Planes to go along with it. But you have created it for 5th edition D&D, so I'm very excited about that. So how would you, for anyone hearing about this for the first time, thinking like, okay, I like Planescape, I'm getting into it, what is Manual of the Planes exactly? How would you describe this book?
I would say that this is the latest rendition of a classic series of D&D source books, which you've already described. As you said, there's been a book called Manual of the Planes throughout most of D&D's history, even as back as far as 1st edition. And we decided we'd love to have one again, so let's make one. To understand what the Manual of the Planes is, you need to know what a plane is. A plane, as people who know about the Planescape setting already probably know what a plane is, but just in case they don't, a plane is another, like, alternate reality, another parallel dimension of existence. For example, in this Netflix show Stranger Things, you have the Upside Down. Or in the Barbie movie, you have Barbie Land. Two very different aesthetics, but the same general concept of a world apart from our own that still functions and is real. That's what a plane is. They also are common in classic mythology, like the Greek Land of the Dead, or Mount Olympus.
So there's not too many books that get a new update like Manual of the Planes that come out for each edition of Advanced D&D. Why do you think that is? Why do you think this book is important to the D&D mythos?
Ooh, that's such a great question. Um, have you noticed how often in D&D content people write about the planes, just subtle things here and there about, oh, the realm of fairy, the Feywild. We have an entire adventure set there. Or the Nine Hells. Oh, we have another entire adventure set there. Or the Domains of Dread. Oh, look at that. We have 2 full books set in the Domains of Dread, which is where Curse of Strahd and Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft take place. In addition, there's all sorts of little subtle references throughout player options. In Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, we have the Clockwork Soul Sorcerer, who's tied to Mechanist traditionally, which is one of the planes of existence. There's a long list of different character options, magic items, adventures, interesting tidbits of lore and history of the D&D world that is tied to the planes. What we wanted to do was make it easy for players to grab all of that information, the most important bits, and some interesting stuff in between, in between the important bits, so that then they can have their own adventures really dedicated to the planes, in addition to the content covered by Planescape Adventures in the Multiverse. Does that answer your question?
Oh yes.
Oh, good.
yeah. I those books are important to me because it you're right. It's been referenced in 5e D&D all along. And with the different source books that have come out recently, and it seems like no matter what group I played with, eventually everyone asks what is out there, what's beyond this realm that we're in. And there's, with all the media going on with the multiverse, especially with the Marvel movies, things like that, that curiosity is even more greater than it was previously. So for this book, is there any player options? What can this book offer to players?
Okay. That actually ties into something really well that I realized I wanted to answer also in the last question, was something this book does differently from the typical mythos for players, is that in most previous editions of Dungeons & Dragons, the content has made it very clear, very explicitly stated, this content is for high level and sometimes mid-level parties.
Hmm.
It actively shoos away low-level characters and low-level parties. And we were like, nope, not at my table. We are going to have low-level welcome planar campaigns. We are going to make it accessible to everyone, including new players and including people who just kind of like that style of play. So, along those lines, we have character creation options. We have new races, which we refer to as species. We have new feats, including some that you can take at first level, some that you have to take at fourth level or higher, and some that are even reserved for epic level play, meaning 20th level or higher characters. We have some backgrounds. Our backgrounds tie in with some of our new feats and feats from the player's handbook, as has been the tradition for the last couple of adventures published by Wizards of the Coast. And for the foreseeable future going forward in 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, we are tying feats to backgrounds. It can be optional if you'd like to, but it is provided for parties who would like to have that mechanic at their table. Getting a feat tied to your background, I think, is a really narratively interesting way to really make your character unique from the get-go. We also have some new spells for every level of play. My favorite is this cantrip Astral Sign, which is kind of like Prestidigitation or Druidcraft or Thaumaturgy, where it's mostly qualitative information, but useful in a wide variety of ways. We also have a couple of new items tied to the planes of existence, different locations and creatures characterized and presented in our book. There's only a few of them for now, but we're looking into expanding that section more in future minor updates.
Can you give us a chapter overview of each section and how this can benefit game masters or dungeon masters, I should say?
Yes. So the contents, there is an introduction and 4 chapters and an appendix. In the introduction, we cover basically what is a plane, what makes a planar adventure. Simple, straightforward, to the point, gets your brain pumping ideas of what could I do for myself and my players for creating interesting plot lines tied to this world, this many worlds. Chapter 1 is character creation. We just went over that. That includes backgrounds, feats, spells, races/species, and new items. Chapter 2 we call Planar Principia. That's largely the Dungeon Master's Toolkit. That covers some general plot hooks for running adventures in the Planescape setting or your own multiplanar, interplanar, interdimensional world. I love that the table. The table is titled 20 Reasons to Hop Planes. I just think that's fun. We also have some guidelines in there about how to present creatures of the planes, and there's a common theme in planar adventures of some sort of afterlife existing. So we give guidelines on how would you like to make those mechanics work for your player characters. Of if my character dies, do they just disappear? Can we go find them in the afterlife and go to that afterlife physically without dying ourselves? And so on. How can we get our friend back? Or what kind of new form does our friend take? We have lots of interesting options for those kinds of things. We also have ideas for how you can compare, contrast, and combine different campaign settings, whether or not they canonically, traditionally fit in the same multiverse as most D&D adventures take place. And lastly, in Planar Principia, we have a series of tables of just lists of monsters from the Monster Manual, our book, and Planescape Adventures in the Multiverse that are thematic to specific themes. For example, we have the Fire list, which is just a list of monsters that either are fiery or like fire or have resistance or immunity to fire damage or things like that. We have the Dawn table, which is a list of monsters sorted by challenge rating again, of creatures that would make sense to take place in a plane of light and heavenliness and rebirth. War, order, nature, fae, thought, and echo. We have lots of different creature theme tables. I think that even people who aren't writing planar adventures can find them to be very useful, just as a place to brainstorm. Oh, I know I want about this level of combat encounter for my players, and I know that it's going to be in this general kind of situation. These tables make it really easy to figure out, okay, here's a short list of manageable, easy to choose from monsters that might be a good fit. So in chapter 3, we cover what's called the Great Wheel. A lot of people who are familiar with the current game's Player's Handbook or Dungeon Master's Guide may already know what that is, but for those who don't, the Great Wheel is the name of the most common model of the multiverse. That includes the inner planes, which are the fire dimension, the water dimension, the earth and air dimensions, the elemental chaos, and also positive and negative energy, whatever those mean. You can learn more about those planes briefly in the Dungeon Master's Guide and the Player's Handbook, but our book goes into a lot greater detail on them. We also go into much greater detail on the outer planes. Those, instead of being planes of fact and like physics, like the inner planes are, they are realms of philosophy and belief. There's a lot more of them, so I'm not going to list them out here. But we have every single one of the outer planes covered in our book. We also have the connecting planes, which are things like the ethereal and astral plane that connect all the little places together, all the different worlds together. The outlands, which is covered in greater detail in Planescape Adventures in the Multiverse, and even the far realm, which is like the plane that no one's supposed to be able to visit, and is forbidden and scary and spooky. But people manage to find their way there anyways, and it's dangerous. So we decided to cover it as a connecting plane. And I think that's really awesome. I think a lot of people really enjoy the Far Realm, just the lore and zeitgeist and aesthetic of it. And I think people who like the Far Realm will like what we put together. Lastly, we also cover the material plane. That's planar jargon for normal places, just normal planets and Earths and Forgotten Realms, Dragonlance, Kryn, Toril, all these places you may have heard of before. Those are all considered the material plane. And we also have the echoes of the material plane, the Feywild and the Shadowfell, which are explored more in other Wizards of the Coast products like The Wild Beyond the Witchlight, Curse of Strahd, and Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft. And lastly, not lastly, in chapter 3, we also cover major societies you can find and major adventurers you can find throughout the planes in our Travelers of the Wheel section. And when going over each plane, you can also discover more about the locations, the denizens, societies, magical effects, and etc. that you could find in that plane, tailored to that plane. We also cover interplanar landmarks, things like Mount Olympus, or Yggdrasil, the World Tree, and so on. The Infinite Staircase, that's my personal favorite. Lastly, Chapter 4, Creatures of the Plains. That is our 70-page bestiary. I used to know how many exact stat blocks we had. It's more than 70. I don't remember now, and we don't have time to count in this interview.
That's how many you have. That's a lot in here.
Exactly. It's 70 pages of bestiary, which is more than what Planescape in Adventures in the Multiverse has. Theirs is about 64 pages. I wouldn't say ours is better. Ours dovetails with them. It's not better, it's not worse, it's just completing. We took some spaces that they weren't able to fill. For example, the classic monster Archons, which are the angels specifically tied to Mount Celestia. We were able to find out in advance that which Archons that Planescape Adventures in the Multiverse was going to cover. So we were able to find out which ones they were not going to cover. And which ones we might want to invent as well. So we did that. We covered the ones that Planescape Adventures in the Multiverse just didn't have the room to cover. We also invented a lot of new creatures. unique to planar settings. For example, we invented a lot of new blights. Blights are a kind of evil plant creature. We adapted them to a wider variety of environments, a wider variety of biomes. My favorite is the flytrap blight, which is somewhere between a plant and a hydra. And you can find it sneaking around the swamps of the plains, hiding out in jungles of the plains. We included multiple references to most, if not all, of our monsters throughout Chapter 3, throughout the planar descriptions. And people who are big junkies into the classic lore of Planescape will find some great treats. We have Ethergonts coming back. We have Formians coming back. We got Hierarch Modrons. It is great.
Mm. So, do you see this book in a way also as an expansion of the new Planescape 5e D&D book?
Yes, most definitely. We intentionally wrote the book so that it could intersect well with Planescape Adventures in the Multiverse, not ignore it, and not replace it. Sometimes, very occasionally, there was parts where we said, okay, Planescape Adventures in the Multiverse, the 5e version, took the canon lore and went in this direction with it. We know that some players who know the canon lore might prefer another direction with it, so we provide options for those two different directions and say, oh, if you want to do the Planescape version of this, if you want to do the 5e version, go with this option. If you want to do a different traditional version of this, go with this other option. There was a lot of debate on the team about how to approach that, but we figured it out in the end, and the answer was, let's provide both options. That'll make both parties happiest, I think. Yeah. So, yes, it is very much a companion to Planescape Adventures in the Multiverse. They're two standalone books that pair perfectly together.
This book sounds fantastic. Is there any last words? Anything you want to share before we wrap up?
So on our product description page and in the first few pages of our preview of the book, in the introduction, we have a content warning that basically says that this book is not for everyone. We imagine it'll be for most D&D players, that most parties will find it interesting and helpful, but we want to make sure that some people are aware there can be topics in this book discussed that might be upsetting for some, very stressful for some readers. For example, negative psychological effects, and our content warning goes into more detail about what specifics you can find on that and in which sections, and ideas of how to avoid it if you would rather avoid those topics. Also, death in the afterlife. That issue is much harder to avoid in this book because the planes are so intimately intertwined with what happens to you after you die, if anything at all. So, we also provide guidance described in the content warning and more thoroughly described in Chapter 2 of our book about how to approach those topics so that you can figure out what mechanics work best for the stories your game, your table wants to tell. And along those lines, we also have guidelines for being respectful. We hired a sensitivity reader to help us write all of this book to make sure that we were being respectful of populations that historically had gotten the short straw in pop culture descriptions of them. And it was really awesome and eye-opening to work with them. First of all, they brought attention to the fact that a content warning would be good to have for this book because of the prevalence of negative psychological effects and death in the afterlife. So we recommend to readers, talk with your players about this. Whether it's before purchasing or before playing with it, talk with the people you plan to play with about this content warning. You can talk about it with them in a group or one-on-one, and just discuss with them, how comfortable are you with these topics? And if you are comfortable with these topics, how in-depth would you like to get? Because we know that some players really enjoy that feeling of being immersed in difficult conflicts, and some don't. We also provide guidance on how to approach it if someone shares something with you about, oh, this is why I'm uncomfortable with something. Or if it comes up in the middle of an adventure, oh, turns out I thought I would be okay with this topic, but turns out I'm actually not. Even if it comes up in an inconvenient time in the story, we recommend listening, respecting your friends, and adding it to the list of topics not to be discussed or brought into the story. And then additionally, in this being respectful section, we have some additional guidelines of how to make it easy for party members to speak up if they're feeling uncomfortable with something like this.
So it sounds like this book combines new lore with old lore. Can you share some tidbits of what might have changed or been added?
Yeah. One of my favorite examples was early on in development, we realized we would be covering gods and deities and powerful cosmic beings in this book. We'd be covering a lot of them, some of them really in depth too. And we realized orcs. Orcs are getting pretty popular to play nowadays. Half orcs, full orcs, orc-esque, other creatures, big burly guys with tusks, whether or not you call them an orc. And we were like, they only have evil gods to worship in the canon of D&D, which says a lot about, the kind of traditional culture we ascribe to orc cultures in fantasy worlds. That's how they became popular antagonists, is because they had evil gods dictating them. We decided we can keep them minor, we can keep them quiet, we can keep them less socially influential than the evil gods. But what if we had some good and neutral orc gods? And we worked together with some of our team members to develop those ideas, and there's some really, really cool ones in our book. If I remember correctly, there's a orc god of divination and time. There's an orc god of vengeance. There's an orc god of love and beauty. I think it is great. For the many players out there who appreciate orcs, I think you'll really enjoy going through this book and trying to find all of the little tidbits we fit in there for that player race / species.
That's wonderful. I remember when Drow at one point was seen as an evil race back then, and I think for them to grow, for them to become player characters, options for players to use, you need to expand the pantheon to just Lolth. You need to introduce different types of Drow deities here and there, and I'm glad that you thought of orcs expanding that as well, because that's like a no-brainer. So I'm glad that there's options for that as well. Anything more about that? Oh, sorry,
yeah.
about to say something.
Along those lines, specifically for Drow, we covered that too, except we didn't need to invent new gods for them. They already existed in D&D lore. So we dug them up. The fan favorite I've seen is, I hope I can pronounce this correctly, Iliastre? Something like that. It's a lot of vowels in a name. She is a Drow goddess of dance and battle and moonlight, and song and goodness. And she is the most common person to be worshipped amongst Drow players besides Lolth, or maybe even more common than Lolth, because player characters tend to be the good guys, and tend to not worship evil goddesses. But even then, for Lolth, we include in our book some backstory of her, some of her current events going on for her, and provide a more humanizing approach to her, to how we present Lolth, of not just, ooh, big evil scary spider queen, to complicated big evil scary spider queen, who when you look at it from the right way, I might not agree with the decisions you made, but I can kind of see where you're coming from, and wow, suddenly you're a lot more relatable. There's a lot of lore in there that will just get people's brains pumping, especially if you have a specific topic of your favorite aspect of D&D races or culture or worlds or societies or settings. This book probably covers that topic, because it's a big book and it covers a lot. It's a book about the multiverse. There's a lot in the multiverse. That's where I keep all my stuff.
Yeah. Do you see yourself making a sequel to this book down the line? Well, what's next for QL Games that you can share?
Next for QL Games, or next for QL Games on planar content?
Both, if possible. Okay. Whatever you can share. I know there's secrets, but
they're secrets. They're secrets I'm super excited to share with people, and I'm like, I can't tell that yet, regardless of whether or not I'm legally bound. it would be unwise in case things change dramatically or whatever before I actually get around to announcing them. Oh well, yes, there's cool stuff in the works. That I can say easily. For QL Games planar content, we're looking into additional products based around the Manual of the Planes content. For example, our Bestiary, we very intentionally left out any specific NPC stat blocks. For example, if you wanted a stat block for a specific Archfey, we don't have that. We do not have a stat block for Queen Titania or King Oberon or the Queen of Air and Darkness. But we do have general Archfey stat blocks with customization options. We don't have a specific big bad evil ghost guy, but if you want to represent Lord Godefroy of the Dark Domain of Mordant using a stat block from our book, you can use the Elder Evil Spirit book stat block, including customization options we provide on the side. The idea is that we only had so many pages that we had room for in this book, and there's so many interesting characters out there in the realms that really do deserve their own unique statistics and encounters and maybe even legendary actions or mythic actions or second stage boss fights or maps and layers, and you get the idea. There's a lot that could be done there. We're investigating writing a book. The current working title is Mythic Planescape, which would be exactly what it sounds like, a collection of those unique, specific individuals, their statistics in combat, their abilities in play, their exploration traits, their social traits, etc., so that then you can have a big collection of boss monsters for your planar setting. We think that'd be really awesome to do. We're currently in the very foundational stages of it, but I think that's something that we hope to put out in a couple of months to a year,
Oh, that's
depending on
exciting.
how long it takes for art.
Oh, so what is the next book exactly that's coming out from QL Games?
So the next book that's coming out from QL Games, I am very pleased to announce. Thank you, Manny, for letting me share this platform with you to announce this. Tasha's Crucible of Everything Else print edition. What I'm holding up in the video right now is the cover art. It was my first big success. I worked with a team of about 30 people. We play tested, we peer reviewed, we wrote. It was super intensive 4-month development process in tandem. Well, as they were publishing Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, we started writing Tasha's Crucible of Everything Else, which is just another book in the same vein of its subclasses, its player races and species, it's all sorts of different character options, dungeon master tools, and even monsters you can fight, just like you can find in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, Xanathar's Guide to Everything, and Mordenkainen presents Monsters of the Multiverse. You can already get most of the content online through QL Games products. What's different about this is that we've had a lot of balance tweaks and updates and quality of life improvements that we've been saving for a major release like this. And it's also going to have improved graphic design, better illustrations. It's going to be all in one book instead of 2 separate volumes. It's going to be one consistent visual style instead of 2 separate styles. I did the graphic design and layout for those first versions of the book, and those were my first times doing it, and I've gotten a lot better since then. I think it's very exciting. It's also going to be available in print. That's been one of the most requested features for those books, is to get it 1 in print and 2 as 1 volume in print. And we're doing that and making it prettier.
Yeah, that cover is gorgeous. That's amazing.
The cover art actually we commissioned it from an artist named Emmy Rogers. She is a very talented artist with a degree in illustration. And the idea was that I'm a big fan of the art genre, the art school known as Art Nouveau. It was inspired by some of my favorite paintings by Gustav Klimt. You may have heard of him, maybe not. And I was like, hey, Emmy, here's some ideas. Here's some art I really appreciate and enjoy personally. What do you think we could do for having this kind of page composition or this kind of style for combining that with your personal style of art? because I also really liked her style of art, and I thought they would fit together really well. And this was the result, and a lot of people really like it. I liked it enough to get a movie poster-sized print of it and hang it on my wall.
So, viewers, thank you for checking out this special episode of Really Dicey. Andrew, would you like to announce the special code?
Yes, I would. If you look in the description underneath this video, you will find a link to the DMs Guild website where you can redeem a discount on the Manual of the Planes. It's normally $30. This discount makes it 25 instead, which is actually like a big percentage of savings when it comes to these kinds of things. So it's only available through the end of the year, through the end of 2023. So get it while you can. But I think that I've said it many times before, and I still legitimately believe it. I think a lot of people will be very satisfied with this book.
I agree. I think if you're a fan of Manual, whether you like the old stuff, or you just want something to expand your Planescape 5e adventures, this is the perfect book. This book's amazing. So viewers, again, all the information is in the description below. Take care. We'll see you next time.